All right, so you've heard me make the claim, the thought that what's going to come from, the downside of closing the economy is worse than closing the economy prediction. Now, I wanted to make an official video on it. Number one, to kind of put it on record even more, and number two, because it's a very important topic. And this is something that, I always go over how long I think it'll take for these kind of things to happen. Of all the things they come up with, I predict, I think this will be the one that we'll see the soonest, because this is something we're going to see within as early as maybe a month or two from now, and as late as maybe a year or two. So this is something we're going to see very soon. And I keep reading through social media and whatnot, and seeing these people that clearly overreacting, just fear mongering to the nth degree, and I don't understand it really. And this is from Joey Saladino. He's an American guy, but he says the real COVID death rate is less than 0.15%. Even if 100% of the population gets affected, which can't happen, it still won't be the number one killer in America. Now, as far as the official number goes, we don't know what the official number is. We can just come up with an educated guess. On one hand, we have a lot of people who are asymptomatic or have very mild symptoms that don't get tested, that have it but aren't in the official count. Um, you know, we have China and probably some other countries, but mainly China, that are clearly underestimating or underreporting their numbers. So again, the number of infected is much higher than the official number. But on the other hand, we have some states that have had to, and I mean, I assume this is the case in Canada as well, at least to some extent, that have had to retract some of the deaths. In other words, they, put the virus as the cause of deaths when in reality it wasn't, or in reality it was something else that caused it, and they just happened to have the virus when they died. So there's many ways that you can, many arguments you can come up with to make it look worse or better. Most of them makes it look better than what the mainstream media and the government's claiming. Um, and that's something that I wanted to just get along first. But the point being is that the idea makes no sense, and the problem is it all comes down to a cost benefit too. All these people that they just react with sheer emotion. It's just sheer emotion that I'll comment, well, we need to get the economy reopened, and they'll be like they just gasp, and it's the harumph, and it's like, oh, everybody's gonna die if we reopen, and it's just this sheer emotion, sheer panic. Let's not put any thought into this whatsoever. And they're people that largely, I mean, a lot of them benefit from the way things are currently going. But they're people that they don't have any idea what they're talking about, and that this all comes down to a cost benefit analysis. Now, if you disagree with me, give me your idea of the cost benefit analysis and tell me why. Don't just put some BS snarky comment, because I really hate that, and you don't even help your cause. You just make your cause look worse too. Like people that make snarky comments, they think all you do is just make your cause worse. Like the only way you're going to improve your cause, for people that disagree with me, is to make an actual argument, like well thought out argument. And like I say, when it comes down to this, it's all cost benefit. The cost, I mean, the cost is that, okay, maybe an extra 10 or 20% of people on top of the people that are currently dying are dying. But on the other hand, we're going to lose out on, I mean, in the States, tens of millions of jobs, in Canada, millions of jobs. And I mean, this is something that again would have to be an estimate, but I would be absolutely shocked if the amount of people that, I mean, just the amount of people committing suicide, like I pointed out too, like more people have committed suicide in the city I live in the last month than have died from the virus. We had 4 people attempt suicide in one day, and at that time we only had like 15 or 16 people that actively had the virus. So at least where I'm at, in, like I said, pretty much other than New York, I mean, in Canada you have Calgary and some areas like that, but the amount of areas where a shutdown is anywhere even close to justified, even in Calgary, I would argue it still isn't justified. But again, the problem too to point out too is that people need to stop this one size fits all mentality. And that's another thing about the left that I really can't stand, and most people that aren't on the left can't stand, is that they have this one size fits all policy with everything, like minimum wage, taxes, all this kind of stuff. In that, why does, I mean, you look at some of these provinces haven't had new cases. I think New Brunswick, PEI, uh, they haven't had cases in a week. They haven't had a new case in a week. Like, how does it make any sense? Like, you are absolutely insane. Like, seriously, I'm not. That's not hyperbolic whatsoever. Like, you're not. There's literally zero, almost zero downside to reopening things, and there's a ton of downside to not reopening things. And that's something that really just goes to show just how ignorant and uneducated some of these people are. So, and again, I think one of the, there's many reasons why people support the shutdown. Number one, we're more socialistic. Number two, they're more authoritarian, big government kind of people. They like that. And in Canada specifically, Justin Trudeau has power right now, so all these people on the left really like that the government has even more power. And there isn't really much of an argument on the other side, because Trump, Trump has gone back and forth on this issue, and no matter what he does, people have been calling him out. Like, if he called for states' rights, and everyone's like, oh, you have executive authority, you should be using it. And if he uses executive authority, it's, oh, he's a dictator. And it's not the same in Canada. It's the argument has always been from day one, more decentralization, more decentralization. Not once have I called for Justin Trudeau to be acting with executive authority and, shut everything down, not shut everything down. It should be as decentralized as possible. Now, if Justin Trudeau wanted to declare to reopening everything, well, so be it. But forcing everybody to shut down because a few areas have been hit harder, because a small percentage of the population has been hit hard, doesn't make any sense. So again, that's something that I want to point out. But and the other thing too is that most people nowadays are completely, their ability to plan ahead and recognize and perceive future threats is pretty much non-existent, like pretty much non-existent whatsoever. Which is why I always point out the people that claim that climate change is this big issue is like, no, you just want socialism. But again, we're going to walk out of this in recession. Now, how bad that recession is hard to predict. I predict it will be bad because, I mean, the numbers point out that it will be bad. I've seen estimates that it will be worse than 2008. I've seen some that it'll be worse. It won't be quite as bad, but it will be bad. And I think people are really overthinking this. And the other thing too is that whenever people hear this kind of stuff, they seem to think, oh, it only affects the rich people, so who cares? But the reality is that it affects the middle class the most. It affects the middle class the most. It affects the poor very little. Well, I mean, it indirectly affects the poor, but it affects the poor not that much, because they're largely on government assistance no matter what. Like, so I mean, it doesn't really affect them. It affects the rich very little because they get bailouts, and it affects the middle class the most is because they're the people that actually have to work hard to get where they're at, and they're the kind of people that have the most to lose. So that's another thing to bring up. But the main aspect being here is that um, the the like I say, going back in history, assuming that history is wrote from a honest and objective and unbiased point of view, which it probably won't be, but let's just, for sake of argument, assume it will be. The virus will be an afterthought. When you're 50 years from now, when you're telling your grandkids about this, um, you will tell them the economic crash that we're about to go into. I mean, we're already into it, but people just haven't recognized it yet, will be more memorable and will be much more recognized in history than having to sit in your house for a couple months. Basically, that's the thing too. And these people that still think that the shutdown is a good idea, literally could not be any more clueless when it comes to that kind of stuff. And you don't have to be that smart either. Like I'm not even that smart. Like I don't have a PhD or master's degree or any of this kind of stuff. I just pay attention to things, and I don't trust the mainstream media. Like that's all you have to do. Like that's all you have to do. Like the mainstream media has a vested interest in the shutdown continuing, and pretending that the virus is worse than it actually is. Because the minute people go back to work, well, guess what? That's less time they have to watch the mainstream media. Not only that, they'll realize that, hey, the virus clearly wasn't as bad as what they made it out to be. So the mainstream media has a very big vested interest in the shutdowns continuing. So trusting them, you're not getting an honest and objective, unbiased point of view. And I mean, you weren't getting it to begin with from the mainstream media. So anyway, I wanted to make a video about that, like I say, because looking at social media, people still seem to be so clueless, and they've been lulled into this false sense of oh, we have to keep things shut down or everybody's gonna die, even when in reality, Alberta, I mean the province I'm from, we've had like 60 people, 70 people die, half of them being from one old folks home, and of the rest of them, probably most of them are people that are over 70 years old. Like, so basically, we're doing all of this to save the lives of 10 people because, if I would have been running things, we would have quarantined old folks' homes. We would have shut down flights from China and from infected areas, which would have meant we would have been hit a lot less hard to begin with. And we could have kept the economy afloat. Anybody that wanted to stay home, like I say, this is the key thing that makes anybody who still disagrees with me, you have no credibility whatsoever, because wanting to stay home if you're healthy and under 50, 60 years old literally makes no sense, because your chances of dying are literally less than 1 in 1,000 if you get this. Like, you're more likely to die in car accidents, all that kind of stuff, like, there's so many more things that you should be worried about more. Now if you're immunocompromised or old, great, stay home, quarantine yourself. But this idea of forcing everybody, this one size fits all mentality, is tyrannical, and it makes no sense. It makes no sense whatsoever. And there's no debate of that too. Like, there's no debate. You Again, you can debate about, oh, what's the best way of going about reopening the economy, but there's no debate that forcing everybody to stay home when a large percent of those people have zero reason to actually need to stay home, again, doesn't make any sense. The debate is, how should we go about reopening the economy, not whether we should reopen it, basically. And the problem too is people have this idea that, oh, well, we have to reopen absolutely everything, or we have to do nothing. Again, it's what stupid one fit size fits all, and it's just a straw man BS argument too, because they don't want to deal with the reality of the situation either. But that's kind of another topic in and of itself. But again, wanted to just throw it out there that I think that and I'm very, very confident in this, that the economic ramifications that will hit us will be far worse, at the very least worse than it. I think that the amount of pain and suffering that's going to come from the economic crash is going to be much worse than the, what, 100, 200 people that have had to go to the hospital. I mean, we got like 50, 60 people in the hospital in Alberta for this. At any given point in time, I guarantee you, if you go back 3, 4 months, I guarantee you that we have that many people or more in the hospital because of car accidents, way more because of heart disease, cardiovascular disease, all that kind of stuff. And we don't shut down the economy for that. The other thing to point out too is that when this is all said and done, my guess is that a better, more accurate study comes out that goes to show that this is just slightly worse than the flu, and that'll be what goes down in history. That they completely destroyed their economy, brought on the worst recession that anyone we'd seen up to that point, all to stop something that's slightly worse than the flu, basically. So basically, I'm going to leave it there. If you liked the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email. I got linked in the description. I appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. And last thing, as usual, check out my BitChute channel as well.